Well, tomorrow is Election Day statewide, and here in Harris County, local races are focusing on the economy. Joining us in the studio to talk about the current Texas economy is a gentleman who has served as Secretary of State, Attorney General, and as the Governor of Texas, Mark White. Mr. White, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
First, you actually ran for the governor's office in 1982 to defeat the Republican incumbent Bill Clements because of his poor economic numbers and lack of support from minority groups. How has the Texas economy changed since you were governor?
Well, when I gave my inaugural address, we talked about the future of Texas not being at the bottom of a oil well, but was in the classrooms of our schools across Texas, and we put a new emphasis on education. And that emphasis included higher pay for school teachers, smaller class sizes, higher standards for graduation, emphasis on math and science, early childhood education. All these things, when done properly, are going to produce young people who are prepared for the future. I've always felt that the best educated people have the best chance of getting to the goal line first, and we want all Texans to have that opportunity. We tried hard to do it. We made great progress. And today, though, we're seeing some fallback in the way in which we finance education.
I'm going to ask you a little more about education in a minute, but first I'd like to go to the fact that Texas has always been a state that depended on agriculture as one of its primary economic sources. What about the current drought? Does the state understand the full ramifications of this ongoing condition, and to what extent is the state going to be affected by this drought in its agricultural sector?
Well, I think it points out the people who've been talking about global warming. The science behind global warming has been discounted by some who think that it's really false science. But the smart thing for us to do is to assume that global warming is a problem, and let's start dealing with it, because even if it isn't a problem, it's the right thing to do. And that's to control give better controls over our environmental impacts and conserve water, conserve fuel, conserve in energy. All of those are the smart things to do, so why don't we do it right?
You know, of course, there were protests this week at the White House in Washington, D.C. against the Trans-Canada Keystone Pipeline bringing tar sands oil to refineries here in the Houston area. To what extent is Texas able to reconcile itself to environmental needs and changes?
I can remember when there was a plan to bring a pipeline through the hill country when I was governor, and there was so much opposition to it. I just told the people, I said, look, we have pipelines all over Texas, but there's some right places for pipelines, and there's some decidedly wrong places for pipelines. So I would suggest to the president and others who are looking at this problem, we need the pipeline. Let's put it in a place where it's not going to be hurting the environment. Pipelines are safe when done properly. You need to have oversight, government regulation of those pipelines to make sure that safety precautions and environmental precautions are maintained. And then we'll get the benefit of the jobs and the resources that are going to come through that pipeline. Remember this. We're sending $1 billion a day to the Middle East and other suppliers of foreign oil when we ought to and can be using domestic energy sources for our needs, and also take advantage of green energy. Do what President Obama has been suggesting, and that is invest in green energy, invest in solar, invest in these energies that are alternatives to what we're using today. Transfer our needs for diesel fuel to using natural gas. All of this will improve the environment and also improve our economy.
Well, that's a good question here. Now, are we more diversified in our economy now than, say, when Rick Perry took office?
Well, let me say that diversification took place, or started to take place, when I was in office. When I was there, 1982-3, we had 20% of our state revenue came from oil and gas. Mm-hmm. When I left 4 years later, that 20% had dropped to about 10%. So because of a decline in the price of oil, the economy had slumped, and we had diverted some of our energy needs to other sources. We can still have a vibrant oil and gas industry in this country without ignoring the need for green energy, wind energy, solar energy. Those are all going to be major components in our future.
You've always been supportive of education, and let's get back to that for a second, and the need to improve education for minorities especially. Since your term as governor, is our current system able to integrate immigrants and their children into our educational system to make them productive future citizens?
Well, that's one of the biggest issues that we have today confronting America. We see so much anti-immigrant conversation in states like Alabama and Arizona and other places around the country. Our country could not well exist today if it weren't for the immigrants who are here, many of whom are not here with papers. They're undocumented. But if you look in the kitchens across America, you'll find an enormous number of Hispanics that are doing the cooking in those French restaurants, and they do a great job. We need to be taking into account the need to educate the children, all children here in this country. They're going to be the natural resource of the future.
What about the political leadership in Austin? To what extent is the leadership making decisions to help or hinder the state's economic condition?
Well, at a time when we have increasing populations of young people who are coming into this state or who have been born into this state, you cannot ignore their educational needs. We have the resources in Texas to pay for the education of our children. We should not cut back there. You cannot push the pause button, just like you would on a VCR, to pause the video on the education of the young people in America. Texas children need to be educated now. You can't push the pause button for their education. And for that reason, we need to see that leaders in Texas recognize that we are a rich state, but we'll be an even richer state with a well-educated population, whether they be from Hispanic communities, families, or countries. Every citizen, every person in this state needs to have the opportunity for a full education.
Let me ask you another question about rural versus urban economic growth. Now, you've worked on projects to bring internet connectivity to rural areas. Is this happening? How's that going?
Well, it's not happening fast enough, and I'll give you an example of the benefits that flow from the ability to have access to broadband technology across America. President Obama is doing a great deal and putting an emphasis on this, but it's something that needs to be done because just go look at your iPhone, go look at the apps that are associated with the iPhone. Almost every one of those apps is a reflection of the innovation of the minds of people in this country. They've done things that only in America would people dream of doing, and the ability to take advantage of that high-speed internet, if it's denied to rural America, then you've denied rural America an opportunity to be part of the growth in our society, both the economy and the intellect. Young people in rural Texas today who have no access to high-speed internet, are deprived of the educational opportunities that come with the internet through your access to so many different educational programs.
Is it turning our citizens into second-class citizens because of that denial?
Well, let's say it this way. It's going to prevent them from being first-class citizens. Look what happened under Lyndon Johnson and Franklin Roosevelt. There's some things that are so true today that were true then. People criticize Franklin Roosevelt for being a socialist. And he built, through the Works Progress Administration, the CCC, as we go up the lakes there in the Colorado River, the dams that were built, the co-op that was built to provide electricity, the REA that brought electricity. I was with some of my Republican friends up there, and they were criticizing this socialist Obama. I said, thank God for that socialist Franklin Roosevelt. Otherwise, we'd be up here looking at some goat trying to find water and lights if it weren't for Franklin Roosevelt and LBJ.
Are cities supposed to do well in the future if we don't have public transportation or a better infrastructure?
Let me say this. If we don't get some better roads, we're going to tear our vehicles up. We'll all be walking. Some of this money that was supposed to have been spent on highways here in this state, I'm afraid, was diverted to other projects. It cost maybe $1 million a mile to resurface and asphalt resurface a roadway. I think we'd all be well advised to make those investments in our infrastructure that President Obama's talking about. This is very simple. Our roads look worse than Iraq. If we had as good a roads as they have in Iraq, we'd be well off.
Would do as well. Well, we have a little bit of breaking news, and since you are involved in this, I'd like to bring it up while you're doing it. The KPFT has learned that Texas death row inmate Hank Skinner has just received a stay, and prosecutors argue that Skinner, who came within hours of death last year, is trying to delay justice. But they say that Skinner's lawyers made the conscious decision at trial to forego the DNA testing because they feared it would further implicate their client, and Texas officials say that Skinner shouldn't be able to demand the testing post-conviction. We are getting more news as this comes along, but you've got a horse in this race, don't you? Well,
I think that the Skinner case is a good example of why we need to use the latest technology. DNA is the best example. And let's make certain before a person's executed, we eliminate all question of guilt or innocence. Surely he did not ask for DNA testing at trial because his lawyer was fearful that it might show that his client, in fact, did the crime. Well, that's fine. That's a legal procedure. But when you come to the overall view of things, Texas never wants to get the reputation of executing innocent people. Let's extinguish all questions associated with this man's guilt or innocence. Test the DNA. Let's test it and get that beside us, do the best we can to make certain we never execute an innocent person.
And finally, you are here in Houston to appear as an MC at former FDIC William Isaacson book signing on Wednesday, November the 9th, coming up. And Isaacson disagreed strongly with the TARP bailouts. Can you tell us, do you support his economic policy vision? Well,
I think that it's wise to listen to a set of alternatives. What happened back during the TARP bailout was probably an overreaction. There was a great deal of fear that was running through American leaders in the business as well as political community about the impact of the failure of Lehman Brothers. The fact of the matter is, the failure to regulate properly brought about the concerns that we are now dealing with. Proper regulation would have eliminated some of those problems. The failure, let's say it another way, if we had not repealed Glass-Steagall,
of 1933 law,
which was a law that was set up to prevent the very things that happened in 2008.
Speculation.
And we haven't done enough to re-regulate that industry and to make certain that our banks and financial institutions are there as a protected resource. If they're going to receive government protection, then they certainly need to have the public interest involved. And today, you cannot say that.
Well, Governor White, thank you so much for joining us. If we've run out of time, I could talk to you all day. You could hear Governor White this Wednesday at the Museum of Fine Arts, second floor, African Gold Gallery at 6 p.m. For more information, you can contact Brazos Bookstore at 713-523-0701 or go to their website at brazosbookstore.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you.